And I'll just share my screen. Okay, so sharing my screen, and we'll take it from the top. Awesome. So thanks for jamming together, Marcus. Good to see you again.
Yeah,
So we're gonna
actually always great to talk to you. And we want to talk about brain training today and talk about who needs brain training. Obviously, the guy in this picture does. And, brains are not that different from bodies. When people keep publishing these reports that are not new, things like that run along the adage of if you don't use it, you lose it, whether it's muscle mass stopping to increase around age 35, and then the only way to keep it going is to keep working out, or they do the same thing about talking about the brain. So
and, and that's super interesting concept, because a lot of folks don't actually realize that the brain is like a muscle, and the brain, just like a bicep, right? Where I work out a bicep, it has a neurometabolism. And
yeah,
so it needs the nutrition, and it needs a blood flow, and it needs for us to actually use it and go through the motion. And it's interesting with the brain gauge, because what we're seeing is when people actually start training with a brain gauge, they're getting really robust muscle tone, if you will, only it's a brain tone. And we'll talk a little
right,
bit more about that.
right. No, it's really exciting. It's really cool. Let's go to the next slide. So, obviously has parallels to physical fitness, and I didn't draw any of these pictures, by the way. I cheated. I used AI to make.
Chat by GPT, I guess.
Yeah. So anyway, that's you know, and you can work things out the same way with the brain as as you can physically, and there's a lot of different ways to work it out. But let's talk about those.
Yeah, and when we were working with clients with a brain gauge, what we're finding is that different parts of the training regime are analogous to resistance training, or things like endurance training, or things like flexibility. And so I'm happy that we have this platform, because it really helps us to actually help with those three different elements of training, analogous to just not just lifting weights, but there's also almost like a cardiovascular and endurance aspect of the training that you guys have really figured out. So thanks for that.
Right. And so the basic, and here's another one of another example of lack of muscle activity leads to muscle atrophy. And you don't use the brain and it's going to look bad. And just like the fat Superman's going to look.
And just like the Superman is maybe he's flying around, whatever, maybe he's training, but he's also eating junk food. And just like the junk food affects our physical body, junk food affects our brains as well.
Yeah. Okay, so exercise and activity promote fitness. And I'll just, maybe I've told you this before, but when I was 13, my former swim coach came and gave a talk at the swim team banquet. And he stood up and he said, what you guys need to be fantastic athletes, what you have to be really be a really good athlete or be a really good swimmer is, and he said, sex. So of course, sex is an acronym. So, of course, 13-year-old boys were getting real excited, but then they heard, oh, it's an acronym: strength, endurance, and flexibility. So those are the key components for basically being athletic or being physically fit. And that's just what it sounds like: strength, endurance, and flexibility. But in the brain, its strength is kind of related to myelin integrity. Endurance is related to your ability to focus and keep moving. Flexibility is very related to plasticity, which is a real core fundamental value. So,
well, here I was getting excited that we needed sex to actually have proper brain functions, and maybe we do, because it does increase the blood flow. And some people might actually increase those elements into their daily regime.
yep.
All right.
And we just say measurements are critical for tracking progress, like with the brain gauge. And if you don't measure, how many athletes don't measure their progress? And I say athletes, as soon as you say athletes, some people say, oh, this doesn't apply to me. Well, one of the big things is if you really look at brain health scores, how they parallel physical fitness scores, look at the different, there's the difference between, like, say, take a 20-year-old and look at the difference between their scores, either for physical fitness or mental fitness, between somebody who's sedentary and somebody who's active. Not that big a difference. Go to somebody age 60. If one of them is at age 60, if they're not active, if they're totally sedentary, both mentally and physically, their scores are terrible. But if they're active, their scores look like a 20-year-old's who is, so the difference between active and inactive 60-year-olds is enormous. It's small and growing in the 20-year-olds. So I don't know how much experience you have with your patients with that, or your clients rather.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think that first of all, if we can't measure it, we can't improve it, right? And we forget where we were. So that's a key thing to tracking progress. That's why we love the brain gauge and what we do. And then on the training side, absolutely. I mean, it's like when you get into, when you're a younger person, your hardware is still, your hardware like a computer system, right? Your brain, the structure of it hasn't really been compromised. But as we age, whether that's food, stress, impact to the fascia and everything else that gets restricted, and even potential damage from acute injuries, like traumatic brain injuries, if we played sports when we were younger, or even what they call just regular aging process, accumulated, impaired performance. What we're finding is that when you're actually training, just like I think it was Ronald Reagan, where he was shot once, right? And he actually started weight training, and he had to actually get new suits because he was developing muscle mass, right?
Right.
It doesn't matter what age you are. If you start working on your hardware, right, your structure, using functional training, whether it's muscle or brain, you're going to expand and you're going to actually improve your metabolism in your muscles, the growth factors and things that go in the blood flow. So quite literally, with a brain gauge, we're measuring the impact to the brain gauge in increased blood flow, and blood flow translates to neurometabolism. And as you actually have more neurometabolism, you have the growth factors, almost like when you get a pump, right? Yeah. So we've actually measured the pump that the brain gauge induces on people. And when your muscles get pumped and your brain gets pumped, you actually start growing and you start actually expanding that capacity to have the capacity of a younger person.
That's right. So question people ask is, what is brain training? And in really simple terms, it's analogous to physical training. And it's what we do to keep it in shape and help it from injury. And, and a lot of times instead of brain fitness, you'll hear the term cognitive reserve. And, there's a lot of reasons to build up cognitive reserve. One of them is it helps with aging effects. Another one is it helps with injuries. So if you have a big cognitive reserve and you get an injury, you're actually going to recover faster.
And that we're seeing that with clients we deal with Lewy body dementia, MS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, all kinds of traumatic brain injuries, all kinds of issues. And Mark, the way we see it at Brain Mechanics is we see cognitive reserve almost like a bank account, right? Yeah. And your bank account could be, you could have a bank account and you can actually you might actually owe quite a bit. So we have the reserves, and then we have, cognitive debt, right? When we have an impact in our brains or aging and things like that, right? So we have to keep this debt, and this debt sometimes as we age, it's like compound debt, right? And we're not really taught about this. It's kind of invisible things that happens on the background where we start incurring this debt. And then we can also, increase the capacity through cognitive training to almost start paying out that debt, right? Really get our bank account filled up and start paying the debt to the point that we're now debt free, and then we start getting from the red into the black, right? And what we're experiencing is that with the brain training and the brain gauge, we're seeing really impactful results to tying the brain functional training with a lot of the neurometabolism approaches that we have to get the blood flow going, to get the nutrients going, to expand the fascia in some of our programs. So that now the cognitive load can really expand, and then that spending account can then be used to actually heal and regenerate the brain.
Exactly. So who's, you've got more experience with it than I do, but, athletes that want to be faster, patients that want to get heal or recover faster, clinicians that want to complement brain therapies, people that want to improve cognitive reserve. And we just mentioned why it's important to fill that bank up and get that reserve going. Stockbrokers that want to make faster or better decisions faster, than anybody that wants better brain fitness.
Yeah, and I got to tell you that out of all the modalities that we're using, the combinations of brain gauge along with all the other ones for neurometabolism, we're getting fantastic results, and we're getting people as you work through, the hardware and training and bulking up the brain, if you will. As an athlete, you really are able to make faster decisions. So athletes talk about slowing down the game. The reason why the game slows down is because they're able to process more information faster. The buffer of brain capacity, if you will, almost like a RAM, right? When your RAM is filled with, it's not running really well, filled with processes that really take up the capacity, the game is too fast for you. But when you're able to train these functional elements, it almost opens up your RAM capacity like a computer system to process more information. And when you're able to process more information, the game slows down. You're able to get into a flow state. So we're seeing this with athletes, professional athletes, how we're actually using the brain gauge for performance, but also seeing athletes that have actually suffered some traumas like traumatic brain injury and concussions. And that's a key thing. I mean, athletes, it's time for athletes to take their wellness in their own hands and recover faster, because they're really, at the end of the day, leagues and things. I mean, let's be honest, these are folks who just keep coming in. If an athlete goes down, there's another one lined up, right? So it's up to the athletes to take power in their own hands. And this type of training and measurements are so powerful because they can really take the guesswork out of knowing whether you should actually be returning to the field based on the functional assessments. And then before you go into the field, the thing that you can do to improve those functions is actually to do the training. So it's both a measurement platform and a training platform. Also, clinicians, like we're seeing this, we're actually offering some services for clinicians, and we're finding that this really is an objective measurement. So having an objective measurement of brain functional improvements, it's a key thing. There's not much interpretation. It really is either you improve or not, and you see the trends over time. And it's such a powerful tool to see those trends over time. And as a clinician, and even the protocols that we use, we change protocols every 2 weeks. So it's vital for us to understand the impact that protocol had and to take an objective approach to measure those before and after, right? So for us, we change based on evidence. People talk about evidence-based health and wellness. Well, the brain gauge allows you to actually take that evidence-based approach like we're doing with Smart Wellness. And then also stockbrokers is really interesting. So not only do they have issues of making decisions, like trying to make fast decisions, but also have impulse control. That's a huge thing, right? And training that. And look, we can get into talk therapy and beliefs and all these different things until we're blue in the face. But if we're not actually training that muscle and to actually be able to execute that impulse control or decision making, it's just talk. This is not talk. This is exercise. This is actually changing our structures so that we can actually then execute those belief patterns or whatever it is that we're looking to do. And we're also finding anybody who's really getting into brain fitness, people who have, things like brain fog and all kinds of issues. I mean, it really is not only an excellent rehabilitation and recovery platform, so you can get back into the game faster, but also a platform that really gets you to optimize your performance overall.
Yep. Okay, so one thing we always say, training can improve the scores all by themselves and obviously increases cognitive reserve, but you can look at the brain gauge scores. You see here where somebody started training and their scores were bad. And after a while, it took a while, but then their scores got much better. So, and the main thing to think about is I did have one person say, look, I did this all day and I'm not any better. And I was like, man, how many times do you train for a marathon and you went out and ran 20 miles and then tried to do the marathon the next day? I mean, it doesn't work that way. Your brain cells are not that different from the rest of your cells in your body. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. And also with our clients, what we're finding is that if you're pushing too hard, the physiology and psychophysiology push back.
Mm-hmm.
Like these changes, it's not like you can just punch somebody in the mouth and change their teeth structure. That's not the best way, right? That's why you have braces, right? The biological sculpting and neurological sculpting is like really. I use the analogy of like building a Zen garden, right? It's got to be trimmed, it's got to be taken care of, right? And there's a bit of work, structural work, but then it's a gradual process where you create this beautiful neurological patterns, right? Or really like a professional athlete. Olympic athletes, for example, like you're saying, they don't just jump into that 40-day train and they train what is called periodized routines, right?
Right.
And really the brain gauge is the only platform that we've encountered that allows you to do periodized training routines like an Olympic athlete type level, but for brain functional elements, which I think key to what we're doing. So measuring those, applying a therapy or a change in the protocol in the phase of training, and then measuring, for example, you see here initial training or these little white dots. With a brain gauge, you can actually put in the protocol step that you had in the details, and you can directly see how that detail impacted brain functions over time, which is why we love it.
Right. So how do we design the brain gauge gym just like an exercise room? And it's got multiple exercises. And so you see those multiple exercises are speed, accuracy, TOJ, timing, plasticity, and multitasking. That's on the first page. And those are the different exercises. Then you have different degrees of difficulty. So level 1 is the really easy level. Everybody, that's like the training. That's like, how do that's basically the very beginning, very easy, no problems. If you follow the and it gives instructions. The rest of things, if you're like me, you get bored reading the instructions each time. So levels 2 through 5, they're a little bit harder. Level 5 is the hardest, and they don't have instructions. Now, what you do is you look at the brain gauge test scores. So you say, here's an example of somebody's test scores on the left, and where they did pretty well on everything except speed and TOJ. So those would be the things that you want to work on. So you work on speed, and TOJ would be the most of the focus, but it wouldn't hurt to work on everything else. There's a tiny bit of overlap between all the between the impact of all the exercises on each other. Anyway, that's basically that should be pretty straightforward.
Yeah, we love it as a training platform. So myself, I used to do a bit of bodybuilding back in the day, and I lived on Excel sheets.
Yeah.
And I lived on tracking the results and things, and we love this. I mean, it really is a comprehensive platform. What I like is that if you see on the left, when we do an assessment before, it gives us the areas that really should focus on.
Yeah,
So with clients, when we work with the clients, we find the areas that are most impactful. It's kind of like bowling, where you want to hit that one ball, that one pin that can hit others, right?
right.
So we go through the lowest hanging fruit and the areas of difficulties, and then we train those up. And then what happens is we see a quick leveling of functional aspects, where if you actually improve speed, it does have a connection to other parts of the brain, that as the speed goes up, maybe parts of the brain were actually compensating for the speed deficit. And as you go through, speed or time under judgment goes up, and now you've got more of a comprehensive approach. It's kind of like having somebody who's trying to bench press, but they have weak triceps or weak shoulders, right? So what we're seeing when we're doing our periodized routines for our clients, areas where let's get the tricep and the shoulder going so that our bench press can actually be better. And that really helps to overall brain functions in general. So it's all the different pieces are really related, interconnected.
Yep. Is this an example of what your scorecard is going to look like? Depending on how far along you get, you select one of the boxes. You can select them in any order. Generally, you start with level 1, but you don't have to, because if you're familiar, if you've done it once, you don't need to read the instructions. You start at whatever level that you need to work out at. For example, if, again, it was designed like a weight room where you have different exercises, and level 1 through 5, level 5 would be, say, the heaviest that you would do. But if you can't do level 5, then you would back off and just work out at level 4 for a couple of weeks before you jump up to level 5. So it's really just like an exercise room with different weights.
And we love it. Like we've embedded the brain gauge into a solution that we call a mind gym. And so that's a key element. Like honestly, it's a gym within a gym. It's specific, the brain functional aspect is like almost like powerlifting, where you're doing this basic foundational core lifts that actually impact everything else. So the other modalities that we do with neurometabolism, functional neural infrared, neurofeedback, there really are built on top of those, but we need a really good foundation around those. And Mark, when we're looking at this, which one would be, to your analogy of sex, which one would be the strength, endurance, and flexibility?
Would be the speed, and strength would be speed and accuracy.
Okay.
Endurance would be a little different. Well, I would say I'd say plasticity and multitasking would contribute to endurance, but being the focus score is really a reflection of endurance, and all of these tests actually will help with your focus and your ability to, or will help with your endurance. And in other words, if you were to like do all these tests and say do one set, and then wait 5 seconds, do another set, wait 5 seconds, do that for about 10 minutes. That would help with your endurance. Plasticity and multitasking particularly will help with flexibility or plasticity. Those are two, multitasking is not actually a test on our battery, but it's a really good exercise. So these exercises aren't exactly like the test assessments, but they're good exercises so you can improve at those test assessments. Why don't I share my screen and go to my screen and just give a quick demo?
Yeah, absolutely. There we go. And I just want to say real quick too that when we're actually training, when I'm training, I actually feel after a certain amount of repetitions through the circuit, and it's considered like circuit training, I actually feel my brain. I actually feel my brain as if like a little bit of a soreness, a little bit of a soreness in the brain when I do this. Not as deeply as when I do a functional near infrared type training, but still, like I feel it like, ooh, I did something there. A little bit of a burn, I guess, would be the thing, right? And so I do feel that endurance.
This is the speed is the easiest to demo because it flashes up my answers and it'll be embarrassing. And so I've just got this up here so you can see, level 4 or 40%. So if you're at, let's say you fail, or I failed at level 4 on purpose the other day just to put something on there. And what you do is you back off and you train at level 3 for a while until you're ready to go to level 4 again. And all you do is you select level 3, then you grab your brain gauge, and each time you feel a tap, you respond. And I typically don't do as well when I'm talking, because this is typically something you want to just train at. You should do a little better when you're more focused.
Well, you're also training a little multitasking, right? Because you're having a conversation.
This is a multitasking training, yes. And so multitasking, that's a real glad you brought that up. But so that took hardly any time at all. That was one set. And what I would do is I would do one set and then wait 15, 20 seconds, then do it again. Rest interval is important. So, if you want to improve at that, you just keep doing it and then wait a couple of days, do it again. And that's the kind of thing you want to do is you want to do it, say five repeats of what you just did, see how you can do, and just do that each day. And pretty soon, basically you'll get, protein growth and more myelin formation, and that, you'll get better. When you do speed drills, you get better. But the multitasking thing, when you can do this while you're sitting in Zoom meetings, watching videos or whatever.
I'm guilty of that.
Yeah, and you can actually, help yourself learn how to multitask by splitting your focus, or learning how to do that, doing two things. So
And I find that's a healthy form of multitasking. So sometimes multitasking could be, not good because it affects our mindfulness. But I've recently been applying that to what you're saying, Zoom meetings and stuff like this, to get a kick, and I've actually seen my performance go up. And
yeah,
so my routine, I'm up now to 10 sets, and I do 30 seconds between sets. And I've been focusing mostly on the neuroplasticity side of things. I'm actually learning different modalities, and I'm actually finding that as I improve my neuroplasticity score, I'm able to expand my capacity to reach into different knowledge areas. So we do quite a bit of interdisciplinary type research, and I've been doing this for many years and at a high level, but I
yeah,
am seeing impact to my neuroplasticity aspect that I do feel is making my multimodal, protocol creation abilities much more powerful. I'm more receptive to adapting to new things, and that's a key thing because as we age, and I'm turning 50 this year,
right.
as we age,
Yeah, staring death in the face. So
yes, what my youngest son was saying, but as we age, we become rigid. We become rigid on our belief patterns. We become rigid on different things, and I'm quite literally feeling the effects. And I consider myself to be an open-minded person, but I am feeling the effects of that neuroplasticity training, and I'm finding is adding more fluidity in my ability to adapt new concepts and things on my own personal life. So I think it's a really fantastic. So I'll share again here. So we go back to the presentation. Let's see here. Yeah, and I wasn't expecting that to happen, but it's starting to happen, Mark.
yeah.
I'm seeing that.
Okay, so this is the goal. This is what you want to get to, 100% on everything. And that's just another way to look at things. It's a scorecard on the training program, on the exercise room, which is a little bit different than looking at the test assessments. And it's in some ways it's a little more rewarding. It's just easier to knock it out and build on each day. Like I said, you can jump around and fill it out in any order.
And Mark, what I love about it, so we're deploying this in teams and athletes, and what I love about it too is the capacity to actually do a leaderboard.
Right.
And that's super cool. So, turn this into a gamification was brilliant because athletes are very, very competitive.
Yeah.
And when we deploy it with his teams, they're actually looking at their scores and seeing which one is better. So it really turns it into more of a performance enhancement culture on the training as well as the measurements.
Yeah. Everybody loves the leaderboard except the guy that's last place.
Yeah.
So
What was that?
I said everybody loves the leaderboard except the guy who's dead last.
Yeah. Well, he gets, it's like as a team, you're really as strong as your weakest link, right? Especially in team
Yeah.
sports. So
Rising tide floats all boats. However,
yeah, yeah. But the cool thing is that if you have team members who are lagging, then as a coach, and we work with coaches, the coaches are trained to actually work and reinforce. So when we build the personalized routines, we actually then build out more repetitions and more sets. No different than a quarterback who actually maybe he's not good at throwing long passes, right? So we then built out the competencies and the parts to actually get into throwing long passes, right? But again, if you don't measure it, if you don't socialize it, if you don't make it into a team sport activity, then you're not really getting the full benefit of this, in my opinion.
So how is brain training different from other methods? And basically we keep talking about we target basic building blocks of information processing. And we do this both in testing and in training. This is analogous to the strength, endurance, and flexibility in physical training that we've talked about. But, processing speed, focus, lateral inhibition, plasticity, and timing, those are all basic functional building blocks. So, most brain training systems, they target cognitive processing as executive functions. They end up doing surveys. They end up doing really long questionnaires. They play games, but it's really, I'll say this much. If you were to train to go and work out in the weight room and and somebody told you can work out, say 15 minutes, 2 days a week for 3 weeks, and that training would stay with you for 9 months, I would say, no, it wouldn't. I was a competitive athlete for many decades. And all I can tell you is there's not an exercise in the world that you get better, that you get stronger at or better at that's going to last 9 months. I mean, that's the whole thing is if you're training functional building blocks, it's like lifting weights. You're going to either strengthen or you're just going to get weaker. And I mean, that's just really important to know. I mean, if something's going to last 9 months, which a lot of brain training systems brag about, it's all they've done is teach you the rules to a game.
It's really good you say that, because we've been getting, my experience is that if we're using an analogy of exercise, what I consider the brain gauge to be is like powerlifting.
Mm-hmm.
These are core elements that are like bench, squats, clean, deadlifts. These are things that actually like produce outstanding results and get you to be built like an ox, right? As compared to things like, if you're trying to train your chest, if you do cable crossovers, that's a concentration exercise. And what I see these guys doing is just a bunch of concentration work, but they're not even realizing that this is concentration work. They're not even, I think, understanding this mental model of training the foundational core elements. Now, if you do squats, bench press, power cleans, and rows, now you're getting into bulking elements that translate into functional strength. And I think that, in my opinion, based on what I've seen, and look, we work with neurofeedback, functional neurofeedback, micropulse neurofeedback, all these different modalities. And I'll be honest with you, that I think for us, in our opinion, the brain gauge really is about functional foundational elements. These are core elements. And if your core is not strong, doesn't matter what you do. Yeah, you're doing some training. And yes, you're getting into some results. But if you're not training core strength, you're not really going to go in and actually structurally impacting the brain functions at a deep level. It's just a game breaker. I mean, game changer. It's a game breaker if you don't do that, because and the challenge is that most people are not understanding the difference. So I think educating people on this key thing, this key area, Mark, is so important, because there's not an appreciation, because number one, there wasn't a way to measure brain functions unless you're hooked up to an fMRI machine. Number two, for sure, there isn't any other way to actually measure brain function, train brain functions like the brain gauge. So up to this point, this wasn't even possible to even have this conversation. Right?
Yeah.
So it's really interesting.
Okay, other differences. One, it doesn't depend on language. That's obvious, but a lot of things depend on language, and that, basically there's a lot of nuances between different language skills, and that really speaks a lot to things like the way you test people as well. Things like self-report and symptoms and things like that. We don't measure symptoms, by the way. So, that's another way the brain gauge is different from other measurement systems. We can measure reaction time accurately. The brain gauge does that very accurately, and it's actually the only commercially available device that can do it accurately. All the others are really a mess. So, I mean, it's, you can read about it if you want, but, researcher contacted the other day, and they had gotten a comment from a reviewer saying, hey, how did you correct for skewness on this data? Because all the data seems really clean. And I said, I don't get it. I have to think about that. And I came back and said, oh yeah, they're used to reviewing papers where, the last 30 years, everybody's reaction time was so messed up. They had to try to correct it, and they can't correct it because they're basically trying to measure, a tablespoon measure with a gallon jug. It's just not. Try to do all these jump through these mathematical hoops to clean it up.
Well, but help me understand, because this is what I'm seeing out there, right? So you have all these platforms that make claims to measure reaction time. So
well, they also
using a map.
They claim that they can get you to your reaction time faster, but they can't measure it.
I'm using a mouse. My mouse is connected to a wireless mouse is connected to my computer. My computer is connected to my wireless router. My wireless router is connected through the internet, through my ISP, to traveling through the world to wherever the server is, somewhere in the world. Now, I come from a background of IT, and I can tell you that when I test my internet connection from here to maybe in Georgia or Tennessee or somewhere else, is different, or having Costa Rica or Colombia. So I'm sorry, but anybody who says that they're measuring accurately reaction time using the internet as a training tool it's really, in my opinion, bogus. And I don't think it's an integrity. Not only that, what we're finding is, if we're actually training neurological training, if you're training a person's neurology and you're having this structural gap of information processing that has nothing to do with my biology, that's actually training my neurology incorrectly.
Yeah.
That's in my opinion. And we deal with neurofeedback and all kinds of things. If I'm actually training my neurology in a platform that actually has this baggage of processing capacity issues, I think that's I don't think that's responsible. Yeah. So what I love about the Brain Gauge is that it's all built in, wired through the sensory motor reflex, and it's actually measuring in nuances of milliseconds at a time. And it's all within the hardware. So I didn't really know this, but quite literally, we could test someone without actually being even connected to the internet. So it's all fully integrated, and there isn't any lag time there. The only lag time is what is true within my biology, from the sensory motor reflex to my brain structure. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to double click on that, Mark, because I think that a lot of people are making a lot of claims out there, but from my experience, and we've tested all kinds of training tools. If it's out there, we've tested it. It's part of our Smart Well approach. And I got to tell you that nothing stands the measurement of brain function like the Brain Gauge does.
Yeah. And just a shout out to the fact that there are many videos on reaction time that we've done just by itself. I mean, that's a long story, but the bottom line is, the people who you have to be able to measure reaction time accurately to measure reaction time variability well. And reaction time variability is how different you are on each test, and that's directly related to your ability to focus or attend. And so nobody else can actually measure that. So anyway, yeah. And the other thing that we do, we're bare bones, man. We put all our effort into having a gym. You go in a gym and nobody brings you balloons on your birthday, but a lot of these programs send you a little picture of balloons or party favors when it's your birthday or a special day, or hey, great job. We don't do that. We're pretty hardcore.
Well, you're very caring people, though. I mean, I got to say that you care. Me as a client, you've cared for me, and you've invested time and energy in us understanding the platform. So I think the energy that you wouldn't go on superficial things. I think you from what I have seen, Mark, maybe you're not sending balloons, but you're spending time on energy on the things that matter. Yeah. And I think that one of the things that I love about the Brain Gauge community and the approach of doing this Center of Excellence is that you are supporting us with the knowledge and information. And I got to tell you, I don't know many vendors that I can just have direct conversations, call on the phone and say, hey, I'm having this challenge. And we talk to you directly. It's in many layers of other people. It's just really true, genuine caring for people. So you're not giving balloons and superficial stuff, but there's heart and there's care, and I want to thank you for that, because I don't think anybody who deals with you, I think, experiences this from,
Yeah, well, that's sort of the point about the no balloons. We try to put the effort on what's going to work. Um, and it is kind of brutal though, in the fact that a lot of people have done a lot of things to make everybody feel good about their scores. I'm sorry though, if your scores are low, your scores are low, and you're going to have to bring them up. There's no excuse. So that's the whole point. I'm 65 and I can get my scores pretty doggone good, but that's from a lot of work. So
Yeah, well,
now that you're
Mark,
50, man, you've really got to work.
well, Mark, I think that when you're looking at trying to get into a high level of performance, brutal honesty, when you're getting into like Olympic athlete, professional athlete level, brutal honesty and transparency to where you're going, and understand where you're going, where you are, to know where you're going is a key thing. So I
Yeah,
don't think it's a bug. I think it's a feature to what how you're doing it, kind of.
we did get some feedback from clinicians who said, "Oh, what do I tell these clients who get bad scores?" And I said, "Well, do you think they deserve them?" Well, yeah, they really are on sort of the edge of dementia. I said, then tell them. If you were and I use the analogy. I said, if somebody walked into your office and your job was to say you were a personal trainer, and they walked in and they were 200 pounds overweight, would you tell them they looked great? They didn't need to lose weight. So it's the same. This happened. I get this question a lot. People, it's like, no, I'm sorry. If somebody has been, kicking the can down the road for 10, 15 years at age 50 or 60, and it's time to wake up and turn things around. You can't just quit. You can't just say, great. So.
Well, I have a story that I want to share real quick, Mark. So I think the platform doesn't provide that out of the box, but I did have an experience where we deployed the Brain Gauge in the Cell Institute in Colombia, and they're dealing with we're working with them for orphan neurological disorders, and we had a client that we were actually deploying it for the first day, and so I flew down there and met with them, and we had a client who had MS, and this lady, she can't really play games, and with her condition, she's deteriorated so much. But we were testing her with the Brain Gauge, and I even had to put my hands and the fingers on top of her fingers so I can assist her to do this. And it was really wonderful, because initially she couldn't, it took her a while to actually get going on it, and I had to press a button and see, but I guided her through the process of actually clicking and everything. And then what I started to do is started to celebrate when she actually did something well. And she did it well. And I kid you not, she couldn't function to pressing the button. So she couldn't really function to press the buttons, guys. And then a matter of minutes later, she's actually clicking and getting it. So this actually was working her sensory motor reflex to get skills, required clicking skills to doing this. But I celebrated her, and to the point that I'm like, wow, that's great, good job. And I did that. So sometimes, clients who are having challenges, need that. It's not out of the box in the platform. As clinicians, when we are hearts and actually share with another human being and connecting with them this way and celebrate their accomplishments, quite literally, these people were when they laughed. We did it before. They did a diamagnetic therapy, single cell sequencing for their MS, and then afterwards we did a test. And then the second time she did the testing, she was just doing it, and we all celebrated. And she was crying, and her parents said she's never actually played a video game in her life.
Wow.
And so this is the kind of thing that, maybe it's not balloons out of the box, but the impact that I saw on another person who had like real challenges. And sometimes as therapists, we have to just not be rational, but really open our hearts and connect to them. And when we can have a person, we change our life. I mean, just clicking on buttons and doing a test, change your life. And So I just wanted
That's
to
actually
share
one
that.
of the nice things about the brain training platform is that it is designed so that you can see progress from level 1 to level 2, even though, you know, if you're getting fully tested, those scores look pretty bad. But with level, you know, if you're progressing from level 1 to level 2, it looks great and gives you a little bit of
Well,
encouragement.
and well, it helps because sometimes you need baby steps, right? I mean, sometimes we can take huge leaps, but you know, this whole rewiring of our biology, our neurology, and our psychophysiology is all a very gradual process. And if we can use it like the platform to take little baby steps and track progress, doesn't matter. We know that we're getting better than we were yesterday, and that's all we really care about as human beings, right? We want to become better people, better performers. That's all we care. And I think the platform really is a good point. It's not a huge measurement, but it does help you to understand whether you're taking steps in the right direction. And you know what? When we take steps and we're not getting the results, the beauty is we can go back to the next level, train up, get competency, get a little bit more neurological pathways established, more repetition, and then we to go again. And then we then achieve the higher level. And I've seen this in myself and people who are very sensitive populations.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah,
I think that's the last slide.
yeah, that slide. Mark, awesome. Thank you. I mean, I've been working on this, but every time we jam and we talk about it, my understanding of what it is and the value of the platform keeps increasing. So we've included the brain gauge into everything we do, from our neurometabolism programs and SmartWell to our clinical solutions. We're building these SmartWell, you know, zones and solutions for others. And honestly, it's a game changer. I think honestly, I believe that the brain gauge is going to be potentially in every clinician's desktop in the near future.
Cool.
And it's such a valuable tool. It's no different than capturing blood pressure or something like this. And I think at some point, I predict that this will be widely used by a lot of people around the world. So thank you for that.
All right. Thank you.
All right, brilliant. I'll stop sharing and
That's
we'll
that's okay.
stop recording here. Wonderful. All right, thank you, everyone.